We're so excited you are joining us in this series called Dust. And during our series, we want to share some stories of people who followed Jesus so closely that the dust of his sandals kicked up on them. Some of these stories will be our own Beach Point people, and some of these stories will be historical figures. So we hope you enjoy these stories as we go through our series together. I want to share about one of my faith heroes I learned about in college. His name was George Müller. He was a man whose life was a living testament to the power of faith and prayer. So born in 1805 in Prussia, his early years were far from godly. As a young man, he lived a life of deception and indulgence. However, his life radically changed when he encountered the gospel and experienced true transformation. See, from that moment on, he devoted himself wholly to following Jesus. His unwavering faith would lead him to establish one of history's most remarkable orphan ministries, solely dependent on God's provision. So his journey towards a life of faith began in his early 20s when he attended a Bible study and witnessed believers sincerely seeking the Lord in prayer and devotion. Their example convicted him, and he soon surrendered his life to Christ. He decided to dedicate himself to ministry despite the initial opposition that his father would give him. His father had hoped that he would actually pursue a lucrative career in business. But trusting God's call, Müller pursued theological training. He eventually moved to England, where he would begin his most impactful work. In fact, upon arriving in Bristol, England in 1832, he became a pastor, and he became deeply moved by the plight of orphan children. So at the time, thousands of orphans roamed the streets. They were left destitute due to poverty and disease. And burdened by their suffering, he decided to provide for them. However, he made this radical decision. He would never ask for financial help from anyone but God. He was convinced that if God desired this work to continue, he would supply every need through prayer alone. This is where the story really fascinated me. In 1836, he and his wife Mary opened the first orphanage. They began to care for 30 girls. Word began to spread about this mission, and so the number of orphans seeking shelter grew. And despite having no steady income, he refused to solicit funds or go into any kind of debt. Instead, he prayed, and he waited for God's provision. And the story goes, time and time again, miraculous answers came. Food would arrive at their doorstep just as the orphans were about to go hungry. Donations of money, clothes, supplies would come from unexpected sources at precisely the right moments. His faith in God's provision deepened, and he continued expanding the orphanage to accommodate the growing number of children. Over the years, his orphanages grew from a single house to 5 large homes that cared for over 10,000 children throughout his lifetime. Each child received physical care, biblical teaching, and an education, equipping them for a future of hope. And despite the immense responsibility, he remained steadfast in his reliance on God. He spent hours each day in prayer, recording thousands of answers in his journals, which serve as the enduring testimony of God's faithfulness. His life was about caring for orphans and inspiring others to trust God fully. He traveled extensively in his later years, preaching about faith and prayer, encouraging believers to experience the same reliance on God's provision. He never sought personal gain. He directed every donation towards the orphanage's work and missions. And by his death in 1898, he impacted countless lives through his unwavering faith. His legacy is something that still inspires Christians today, reminding them that God is faithful to provide when we fully trust him. And so George Müller's life was a testament to Jesus' words in Matthew 6:33. Seek first the kingdom of God and his righteousness, and all these things will be added to you. His life was not about personal ambition, but obedience to Christ, demonstrating that a life fully surrendered to God is filled with his provision and blessings. George Müller was someone who walked in the dust of Jesus.